Hello, dear members of Commission. Thanks for being with me on the defense of my MBA thesis, which is called The Influence of Boards of Directors Diversity on Financial Performance of Largest US Banks. The name consists of the two parts. What is meant by Boards of Directors Diversity? It is in fact the different qualities of boards of directors which presumably influence the financial performance of the US banks, and the US banks' performance will be measured in financial figures, and it will be explained a bit later. The outline is standard in accordance with the requirements: introduction followed by a big part, which is a literature review part, methodology, analysis and findings, and interpretations. Due to the little time available, 15 minutes as stipulated, this video is intended on short description on what each part tells you about key matters and the results. This video is not the full presentation of my MBA thesis project. Introductory part points out on importance of governance and reminds us about financial crisis and major corporate failures such as Enron and WorldCom, which had been not a result of individual actions, but a result of factors of which the quality of boards of directors plays a significant role. According to Pfeffer and Salanchik's resource dependence theory, to reduce dependencies and obtain resources from external environment, companies should form links with the external environment, and that board of directors is the primary mechanism for such a link. In this study, these links will be denoted by 5 major qualitative variables such as gender, size, past experience of members, independence of the board, and average age of the board, which are independent variables. Financial performance will be measured by such dependent variables as return on assets, a past-oriented variable measured as net income divided by total assets, and Tobin's Q variable, more future-oriented one, as it considers expectations of shareholders in the form of share prices and measured as sum of market capitalization and book value of total liabilities divided by sum of total liabilities and equity. What Tobin's Q is effectively demonstrating is the investor's belief that the corresponding company will be able to utilize its resources more effectively in the nearest future. The next big part is literature review. This is a 30 pages long part of short reviews of all the literature I have read and analyzed. Overall, the amount of articles related to the relevant studies exceeds 25, and I will not present every study in here, but shortly describe aggregated results of the studies and some of them. Regarding gender diversity, with some articles showing no or negative correlation with the company's performance, major part of studies come to the conclusion that the gender diversity positively affects the company's basic figures such as ROA and ROE. The positive results are found in studies around the world, including Spain, Netherlands, the Americas, etc. In the study of Berg, results of surveys of women holding high positions is shown. On the slides you can see the results of the surveys. Despite the obvious bias in the selection process, the overall conclusion is that nowadays experience and education start playing a significant role in the process of selection of candidates. Along with the description of studies, you will find my criticisms of each of the studies observed. For example, in my opinion, the study of Berg lacks statistical representation as it includes only women's opinions, not men's, for example, and is formed based on the surveys actually answered. The response rate was only 50%. On slide 9, you can see the Seplis definition, which is a European Council of the Liberal Profession. Well, the issue of independence has become very popular during the last decade due to corporate scandals already mentioned above and consequential evolution of regulations. A variety of studies suggest that non-executive directors, I'll call them further NEDs, on boards is good for the company, not only in financial terms, but in many other aspects as well. In slide 11, you can see that, for example, Schwartz study, A Code of Ethics for Corporate Code of Ethics, suggests that boards with higher portion of nets are more likely to make ethical decisions. A study of Hughes, Corporate Governance, Understanding Important Contingencies, dated by 2005, states that regulations will never help organizations to attain changes inside due to pre-established internal culture. The true independence is hard to achieve in Germanic two-tier systems, where management board consists of fully dependent directors. Then you see explanation of that in the thesis project. On slide 12, you can see the examples of studies that prove that internal cultures are sometimes hard to break, and Draco's study finding no evidence of positive influence on companies' performance. On slide 13, so even worse, negative influence of net's representation is found, but overall impression of all the literature observed related to this topic is that there is no complete consensus. However, a slight majority suggests that nets on boards are good for companies. In my opinion, given the recent regulations, it might still be too early to make sound conclusions on it, and companies' financial performance should not be observed through the prism of independence of boards, as the primary reason of their existence is to ensure long-term future of companies, not short-term financial results. So any conclusions, I think, are too early. On slide 14, regarding the size of boards, I will point out right away that the let's say, ideal number of members of boards of directors is deemed to be 7 or 8 people, which is found in several studies, such as Jensen's, dated 1993, and Furstenberg and Malkiel's 1994. Although the studies of Dracos and Bekiris and Ease, Postma, and Sterken found an inverse relationship. Their conclusions mostly refer to increase of number of boards of directors members, not the idea of 7 to 8 people on board. Some other researchers, such as Evans and Dion, 1991, Lipton and Lorch and Jensen, conclude that boards of smaller amount demonstrate more cohesion among each other. Slide 15, you can see that Delton points out that the smaller size leads to less constraints in place, which enhances corporate risks. Coles indicates that bigger boards perform better in financial terms, but does not mention how much big, as it cannot be big, definitely big, of course. Unfortunately, having observed the literature related to this topic, it is hard to conclude that there is any consensus in place. It's hard to say whether bigger size or smaller size are good. Slide 16. Coming to age section, it was strange to notice that the amount of studies is insufficient, although it might seem to be a very important variable. However, the studies reviewed do not show any common outcome. Outcomes are different. For example, in Siciliano's study of 1996, the older were the members, the more effective the NPOs worked, where they were trustees. Bourne concludes that if board's members are younger than 50 on average, the company's values are higher. In a research of 288 Australian organizations made by Ali, no dependence has been found at all. Hafsi and Turgut of 2013 suggests negative correlation. One study suggested that if the effectiveness of boards depend not on age as an absolute figure, but on combination of ages, which states whether there are any clashes between different age groups or not. From this perspective, any study of the ideal age loses its sense. Unfortunately, studies of relevance of professional background and its effect on companies' performance have not been found, which is why there are only 4 sections in the literature review section, perhaps due to the complexity of the topic itself. And now to methodology. We have selected 30 largest US banks by total assets as at the end of 2016. The research type is, of course, quantitative. And dependent variables have already been told, but in the beginning we used ROE, but then we have noticed autocorrelation with ROA, which is why ROE was excluded later. Control variables, initially there were 5 of them, but then after using statistical techniques, we decided that we should leave only one, which is loan portfolio quantity, which is measured by loans provisions in the balance sheet divided by total loans, which shows us the quality of portfolio. Here you can see the summary of 5 hypotheses tested, H0s and alternative, which states that either the null hypothesis is wrong or it has no impact on the financial performance of the banks. The first null hypothesis stands for diversity of women and shows that financial performance should be better the bigger the portion of women. The second one is the same, but it is about nets. The third one is about the size of the boards. Fourth is about average age of boards, and hypothesis fifth is about members of business background, members of directors with a business background. The data for this project has been collected mostly from annual reports as of 2016. Additional sources include New York Stock Exchange, Bloomberg, etc. for a variety of reasons like determination of gender, financial figures, etc. There was an issue with regards to educational background. If you remember, at first we decided to use educational background as well, but unfortunately value of each education is not precise, and we decided to switch to professional background, meaning that in what sphere individuals worked, like whether it's governmental positions, political or medical, for example, or it was purely business background. And I must say that determination of this factor relied fully on judgment. I mean, I read biographies of these individuals and tried to assess whether there were more business background or non-business background. To be honest, most of the members had either business or purely non-business backgrounds. It was a rare case when there were 50-50 backgrounds, which is again logical. And again, this factor is purely a matter of my own judgment. Perhaps the biggest limitation of this thesis work is the resources available for the study. For example, it was very difficult to find all the information required, lots of variables for all the 30 banks, although it might seem to be easy. In fact, it was much more difficult, and I think this is the biggest limitation of this study, that only 30 banks have been selected. However, it presents a great opportunity for continuation of this study by maybe some other students or even professors who can increase the population to 150 or 200 banks and make more sound conclusions about the banks based on the models developed in this thesis work. Also, some other limitations included interdependence of members in the samples have not been studied. What I mean by that is that, for example, greater representation of women on board might have influenced other members as well, their behavior or their quality, and these are much more complex matters which are not studied, again because of the resources and because of the complexity of this idea itself. In first analysis, which is correlation analysis, I have decided that zero point 0.3 to zero point 0.7 will be regarded as moderate, and it is based on commonly accepted principles in all the statistical researches. The first four banks represented 55% of total assets of the whole population, and the total population has been checked on multi-correlation. This table shows you the correlation between variables, and I highlighted with red the ones that are the biggest and that are explained deeply in the thesis. You can see here initial control variables that had been included in the primary correlation. However, these factors were removed, such as GDP of the United States and so on, because they significantly damaged our statistical representation. So we had to take them out and leave only the loan portfolio quality. Well, briefly, what we can see here is that, for example, the bigger the female representation in boards, we notice that the quality of loan portfolio is higher, and this improvement is shown by 0.4 correlation. Another example is average age. The higher it is, I mean, the older on average the boards of directors members, the higher the ROA. So that's how you can understand this table. Descriptive statistics shows the mean, standard deviations, minimum, maximum, and many other variables. I've excluded some those which are unnecessary, so it is also described in my project. For the analysis to be conducted, I had to subdivide control variable into different groups, and in this case, I have decided to subdivide them in by the quality of loan portfolio, low, medium, and high. The list was reassembled in ascending order, and then I got the three different groups which show the loan quality portfolios. So on regression analysis had to be ran 3 times for each of the dependent variables for different types of portfolios. So in total, I had to make 6 regression analyses. Throughout the analysis, my goal was to reduce the p-value, which is statistical error, or which is denoted in this table as significance f, in order to reduce the statistical error. And in this table you can see the variables taken out from the primary regression analysis, and then I reran the test and the results of new p-values, which is again significance f, are shown here. You can see that they are lower mostly, except from ROAL, which stands for return on assets for low quality loan portfolio, and TQL, which is Tobin's Q variable for, again, low quality loan portfolios. These were increased, but it suggests that I could do nothing to reduce, nothing else to reduce the p-value, which is again statistical error. The second variable R square shows actually how much of the population is covered by the analysis. And naturally, of course, when we take out some variables, it is decreasing, which means that it covers less population, and it is seen as a kind of sacrifice that we bear to decrease our p-value. Still, it unexpectedly increased in our ROAH, which shouldn't have occurred, but anyway, it's good. Well, we can see that analysis does not cover even half of the populations mostly. It covers mostly less than half, and it is explained by the small population. As a result of regression analysis conducted by me, I receive coefficients for each of the variables which determine the financial performance of banks. Again, it inherits some p-values, which is statistical error, which means that these equations are, of course, not precise, but they do have some degree of confidence, and based on these equations, we can make some judgment on how much this or that independent variable influences our performance in terms of return on assets or Tobin's Q coefficient. I will not go into the depth on explaining of each of variables. I will jump to the results of the hypothesis tests. The detailed review you can find on the project. Unfortunately, 4 out of 5 hypotheses have been declined and alternative hypotheses have been proven. Based again on the population and the analysis I've made, we can see that there is no correlation in general between financial performance of banks and the female representation. Regarding the non-executive directors, surprisingly, the bigger the amount of non-executive directors, which are independent, or they're also called outside directors, the worse the financial performance. Maybe it is because there is less cohesion or less cooperation. Regarding the size and age, we have found no correlation, means that it doesn't really matter how many members of directors on board, and age as well, the older or the younger members, no correlation found. And surprisingly, the percentage of professionals with business background has a positive influence, which is again against our presumption that diversity is good, meaning that it is better for the boards of directors to be occupied mostly by experienced professionals in the business sphere. Although it seemed in the beginning that people from non-executive fields can bring something new, kind of fresh air, or another vision to companies' developments. So based on my analysis, we can see that it doesn't work well when we talk about boards of directors. But again, in this exact slide, I put the fact that too little data for such broad analysis. This is just to remind you that this is just a test based on 30 banks, which might not be sufficient to make great conclusions about the financial spheres. Based on this project, I had to make a conclusion that I actually hate, which is that diversity is not good for boards of directors. But again, I really hope that somebody, maybe Balzhan or her team, will continue this project. I mean, extend the population and maybe make some other conclusions which will finally prove that diversity is good for businesses and overall for the society. So I hope it will occur in the future. So thank you for your attention. And in the appendixes, I just added some tables that prove that my work was based on actual evidence. Then you can see heteroskedasticity tests, which is actually these are the tests which should be conducted when we use regression analysis. Without 5 conditions, we cannot use regression analysis. I will not go to them. They are also shown in the table in my thesis work. So you can see there that mostly we comply with these requirements. However, again, due to small population, there might be some questions whether we should have used a regression analysis, but overall we do comply with these assumptions. And references, most of the articles used have been taken from JSTOR, EBSCOhost, and the official websites. So I'm sorry for going beyond 15 minutes limit, but I couldn't fit into 15 minutes, so it's 25. Thank you for your attention again, and thank you very much for this opportunity to be able to present. Being outside of the country, of course, I'd love to see you to come to QMAP, but unfortunately I can't, and I couldn't wait for a month. We can discuss further questions regarding this project via email. Thank you very much and have a good day.